and the notorious feature of replication.
Mr. Burns is the true villain of the Simpson family history. We saw it in the Mona timeline, we saw it in the Grandpa timeline. No matter where the Simpsons go throughout history, the Burns family is there to torment them. Well, maybe not in the future. At least not the near future. As for today, we're going to try to figure out how Mr. Burns got to this point. Find out what created this miserly monster. Was it his parents? His lost teddy bear? Those darn hippies? Or is the real villain of the piece Simpsons continuity? The history of Mr. Burns can be broken into 4 distinct eras. First, boyhood. Second, the wealthy Gravitron. Third, World War II. And fourth, building an empire. Similar to the Grandpa timeline study, we're going to go through each era one at a time, listing what happened chronologically and then trying to work out the inconsistencies. Mr. Burns is not typically portrayed as senile as Grandpa, but this is the Simpsons writers we're dealing with. The floating timeline is going to wreak havoc throughout Burns' historical events, and the writers will retcon stuff as needed. I tried to be as thorough as possible in finding Burns' flashbacks to earlier in his life. Big thanks to the Simpsons wikis for providing such a good starting point in researching these moments, by the way. But given the hundreds and hundreds of Burns appearances, there's going to be a lot of old-timey stories and references that will fall through the cracks. So let me know anything major that I might have missed. Now, on with the show. Mr. Burns was born over 1,000 years ago on the massive supercontinent known as Pangea. At least that's what a couple episodes say. As we all know, Mr. Burns' age has always been a running joke on the show. 4-digit ages and whatnot. According to Homer and Delilah, Mr. Burns is only 81. However, later seasons put him at over 100 years old, most commonly cited as 104. The floating timeline would put his birth date in the late 19th century to the early 20th. Burns himself has stated that he was born in 1881. I'm going to use this date as a starting point for reference, and we'll see if it jives with everything in the end. So anyway, Charles Montgomery Plantagenet Schlickelgruber Burns was born in the late 19th century, the youngest of 11 children, or the second youngest of 12 children. He was first tended to by a nanny, or at least until Burns fired her. Growing up, he had a beloved teddy bear named Bobo, which was always by his side, until one fateful day when his parents gave him a choice to continue living with them or with a twisted, loveless billionaire. Mr. Burns, of course, immediately chose the billionaire. We don't have the specifics, but this appears to be some kind of financial arrangement by Burns' parents. They don't seem particularly rich right here. Burns essentially is given the choice between familial love and massive wealth. However, there is evidence that this mysterious billionaire is actually Mr. Burns' grandfather. We learned about Burns' rich ancestors from the Civil War era. And more specifically, Burns fondly remembers the days of going to the atom mill with his grandfather. Just look at this guy. This flashback from Rosebud is especially confusing because there is a great deal of evidence that not only were his biological parents wealthy, but that he lived with them for the majority of his childhood. We'll set aside this inconsistency for now. Master Burns would spend his carefree days on the Springfield waterfront, a crippling Irishman like most children do. Or else he and his father would enjoy a Yale football game together. However, it was not always sunny for young Master Burns. In 1912, he was a passenger on the Titanic, only surviving by making a raft out of steerage passengers. 1 year later, he participated in the Pee Wee pageant of 1913, performing a dance routine for the crowd. Unfortunately, his pants fell down during his performance, and then his underwear, mooning the entire crowd. His mother called him a laughingstock, and Monty felt humiliated. He then took an interest in comic books. However, his father callously confiscated them, declaring he should be playing outside instead. To teach Monty a lesson, his father bought the comic book publisher and burned it down. In 1935, Monty and his parents visited Gimbel's department store, and he sat on Santa's lap. For Christmas, all he wanted was a hug from his mom and a smile from his dad. He excitedly counted down the days until Christmas. But alas, when the day came, he got neither a hug nor a smile, and was instead shipped off to boarding school. Monty never saw his parents again, as they died shortly afterwards. He ended up inheriting the entire family fortune, as all of his older siblings had died unexpectedly. Not sure exactly when, guessing it was at a young age, since we never see them around. One sibling was trampled by a horse, one ate a poisoned potato, his twin was shot, and the rest were stabbed, another poisoned potato, spontaneous combustion, fell down a well, potato, and impaled on the Chrysler building. It is currently unknown whether young Monty Burns murdered his siblings for the inheritance money.
Oh my.
There is no evidence of this, but given how
I committed
Burns
too late.
immediately pivots to warning Bart about conniving relatives and describing the accidents that could happen, well, it makes me wonder. Before Burns sues me for slander, we'll call this the end of part 1. As you can tell, Mr. Burns' early years are a giant mess in terms of its consistency. You've got Season 5's Rosebud, implying that Burns permanently left his parents and Bobo behind. Then you've got Season 31's Bobby It's Cold Outside, saying they actually sent him to boarding school and died. This detail is especially odd, considering we met his mother in Season 7, who was very much alive. It seems pretty clear to me that the writers retconned some of this early season stuff, in an effort to examine Burns' relationship with his parents. If we wanted to make everything work in universe, there's clearly a piece of the puzzle we don't know about. Perhaps the grandfather didn't approve of his son's marriage, disowned him, and later arranged to adopt Monty as his heir. Or maybe this guy, whoever he was, died shortly afterward, and his parents took over as guardians again. The only thing we do know is that Monty Burns never had a loving, supportive relationship with his parents. Monty rejected them, they were aloof and uncaring. Sounds like a recipe for some dynamite college years, huh? Mr. Burns attended Yale University, graduating as part of the class of 1914. He was the big man on campus, playing for the football team, as well as wrestling in the etherweight class, earning the nickname the New Haven Nuisance. In addition, he squared off against Teddy Roosevelt in the boxing ring. He was generally popular with the ladies, although that Mimsy Bancroft never reciprocated his advances. Burns had a roommate named Dink and was a member of Skull and Bones. Unfortunately, his college popularity was fleeting. When Burns lost his strawberry golden curls during his senior year, he was forced to hunker down and take a more serious interest in science. After graduating, Burns must have discovered the wonderful world of toupees, because hey, now his hair is back. While living in France, he proposed to a woman named Lila, who was presumably his cousin. Unfortunately, Monty wouldn't agree to think of others for 5 minutes a day, so she left him. As a result, Mr. Burns did what many ultra-wealthy elites do with their 20s and 30s. He bought a mansion, threw a bunch of self-congratulatory parties, and slept with as many women as possible. Agnes Skinner even let him feel her up during the Great Depression, and at some point he slept with the Countess von Zeppelin. In 1939, at his 25th year college reunion, he met Lily Bancroft, daughter of unrequited crush Lindsay. They expressed their love physically, which was the style at the time. Lily became pregnant and was forced to give up her child Larry and go to a convent. Basically, if you sleep with Mr. Burns, you end up devoting the rest of your life to religion. End of part 2. This part of Burns' life is much more straightforward in comparison to his childhood, especially having Yale right here to anchor it, since his enrollment has always been so thoroughly documented.
Does it have to always be at the
Everyone
bottom?
knows that Burns went to Yale. After graduation, it's not all that surprising that Burns would let loose a little, especially with the Roaring '20s going on. Still waiting for our version to start, by the way. It's interesting that we know next to nothing about Burns' business dealings during this era. I would think that there is something going on behind the scenes. Maybe he's got some stooge successfully running things. But it's possible that Burns was simply splashing around with his vast inheritance for a decade or so. He had such a large nest egg that the Great Depression could pass him by without him even being aware of it. However, World War II ended up being something that not even Mr. Burns could ignore. Burns first enlisted in the U.S. Navy, rose to the rank of lieutenant, and served as Abe Simpson's radio man. Burns didn't take his role seriously, instead spending most of his time wooing the ladies, which caused Abe's brother to be shot down. The two of them were also shot down, and they crashed on a desert island. Abe Simpson, the low-class brute that he is, attempted to drown the king of New Burns Island. They managed to celebrate Christmas together, and Burns inadvertently shot down Santa's sled. He attempted to steal it, but after having a holly jolly dogfight, was forced to return it to Santa. This part of their backstory is so dumb. Season 17, you and I are enemies now.
Oh my
Anyway,
god.
Burns later transferred to the U.S. Army as part of the Flying Hellfish Squad. He was only Private Burns then, as he was demoted after obstructing a probe from J. Edgar Hoover. Private Burns continued being a terrible soldier for the Allied forces. On the other hand, he was an amazing double agent for the Axis powers. Not only did he foil an assassination attempt with Hitler, but he owned factories that successfully made shells for him. In addition, Burns recalls shooting at the Allied forces at times. He even found time to serve in the SS. Toward the end of the war, Burns saw the writing on the wall for Germany and turned his attention to personal financial gain. Remembering his inheritance and his dead siblings, Burns suggested forming a tontine to determine ownership of these stolen paintings. Gee, it sure is curious how Burns always seems to be the final survivor of these kind of things, huh? Funny that. 1 year later, President Harry S. Truman entrusted Mr. Burns to deliver a $1 trillion bill to Europe to aid in recovery after the war. You see, Mr. Burns was the wealthiest citizen and therefore the most trustworthy. Burns, the staunch fiscal conservative and miserly asshole, kept it for himself. End of part 3. We've seen a lot of this World War II stuff before, with the previous Grandpa timeline, but I really like how Burns' characterization lines up with this previous era. That unlike Abe, Mr. Burns was coming off of a decade of parties and traveling abroad. He was the stereotypical lazy socialite who never had to work a day in his life. All that lines up perfectly. Nevertheless, both his Navy and Army adventures demonstrate that you should not underestimate this guy. As lazy as he seems, Burns will scheme and connive his way to the top. You can't give this guy an inch. I think World War II represents the big turning point for him, at least in terms of his mentality and motivation. The time for being a wealthy gadabout is over. We've got an empire to build.
Can it fucking stop with the corner ones?
After the war, Burns finally settled down to focus on his career. This era was all about Burns building his business and pursuing his passion. In the 1950s, he became a big fan of professional wrestler Glamorous Godfrey, not realizing it was actually his former army sergeant. We know Burns always took an interest in wrestling, but he was drawn to the unabashed villainy of Godfrey, the delight he took in making the crowd hate him. In the 1960s, he became chair of the Germ Warfare Laboratory at the State College. This career choice made a lot of sense, given his interest in both science and warfare, as well as his personal uselessness at armed combat. His work was extremely unpopular with students, hippies, and, the non-evil community. So late one night, a group of hippies broke into the lab, released powerful antibiotics, and killed his precious germs.
God.
Mr. Burns was trampled during this escape and was injured badly. Mona Simpson, taking pity on him, stopped to help him. However, Burns turned on her, declaring that she made a terrible mistake and that he would make sure she will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Bye, Mona. Mr. Burns' rivalry with activists did not end there, though. He returned the favor by sneaking aboard Greenpeace and sabotaging them. End of wavy gravy. With his germ warfare dreams dashed, Burns turned to nuclear power as his next enterprise. He secured funding and proper permits to open a nuclear power plant in Springfield, working with respected scientist Wayland Smithers Sr. as his closest advisor. He held a PR event to win over the community, which was attended by young Homer J. Simpson, and unfortunately for Mr. Burns, his dog Bongo. Abe Simpson apologized for the dog, but much like Mona, was rebuffed by Mr. Burns. He will personally see to it that the dog is put to death. Later that evening, Burns tracked down Homer and Abe at their house, still demanding to hand over the dog. He made a deal with Abe to have him take care of the hounds for an entire year, and afterwards forced Abe to only wear slippers and a bolo tie for the rest of his life. Before I forget, one of these dogs that Grandpa took care of was named Crippler, who bagged his first hippie during this era, and proceeded to live for nearly 30 years. At some point, Mr. Burns dated and married a woman named Gertrude. We don't know exactly when this happened. All we know is that Burns missed their wedding, honeymoon, and divorce because he was working so much. This could have happened pre-war, but I would guess that it happened around this time in the 1960s, when he was working to get the plant up and running.
Is it 14 minutes? 16. Okay.
We also know that he wrote a book called The Rungs of Ruthlessness, describing his climb to the top as CEO of a company. Well, maybe not the very top. When Burns set up the power plant, he set a canary as the technical legal owner. The early years of the Springfield nuclear power plant did not go particularly well. There ended up being a serious problem with the reactor. Wayland Smithers Sr. entrusted Mr. Burns to look after his son, and then sacrificed his life to save the entire town from a meltdown. Burns returned the favor by covering up his death and telling Smithers Jr. that he died of a tribe of Amazonian warrior women. Monty, you were this close to being likable. After this point, there is a large gap in the Mr. Burns timeline. We know that he met Elvis at some point, but we know next to nothing about this era until 1974, when the power plant opened up once again in Springfield. We've seen it opening when Homer was a young boy. We've seen it open when he's a senior in high school. Pretty weird. One explanation is that this is simply a retcon, and that detail from The Way We Was isn't a part of continuity. Or else, maybe something happened after the Wayland Smithers Sr. incident. Maybe he was the one keeping things together at the plant, and without him, Burns was forced to close the place. Maybe beloved Mayor Hans Mollman shut him down. Who knows? All we do know is that he opened up the plant in 1974, and during that same year, he let a forlorn President Nixon beat him at golf. 6 years later, he hired Homer Simpson to work at the plant. This should have been a mere footnote in Mr. Burns' history, but was somehow one of the biggest turning points in his life. Let's just say Burns' past history with meltdowns gave him crucial experience in covering up the later ones. And finally, from 1981 to 1985, Burns stole Christmas. End of part 4. So, now that we've looked at all the miscellaneous bits of Mr. Burns' history, what conclusions can we make about this character, and how the writers handled his backstory? Obviously, a lot of the specific dates described in this video are not going to work in a linear sense, but that's to be expected given the floating timeline. Burns' Baby Burns came out in 1996, so it picked 1914 for his graduation class. Monty Burns' Fleeing Circus premiered in 2016, so it decided that in 1913, Burns was only a child. It's fun to document these dates and laugh at how much Burns grew up between 1913 and 14, but I think the more important thing is to consider how true these stories feel to Burns' character, and why they diverge when viewed side by side. When I looked at Grandpa's history, I was surprised at how little the stories contradicted each other. They would tweak little details about Abe and Mona, but would generally drop into different parts of Grandpa's life. Burns' history is considerably messier, more in line with what I'd expect from the chaotic Simpsons timeline. Sometimes Burns left his parents and opened the plant when Homer was a teenager. Sometimes Burns stayed with his parents and instead opened the plant when Homer was a child. The writers refused to modify some aspects of his history, like going to Yale and being in World War II, but it's clear that Burns' history is more flexible and elastic than someone like Grandpa. Burns doesn't have characters like Homer and Mona to anchor him, so his history will always be more loosely defined. In terms of answering why Burns is the way he is, we see a definite split between the classic Simpsons and the later years. Early on, the show preferred the stance that Burns was just always kind of rotten, that it was inherently in his nature to be like this. Maybe he also has the evil gene. Whereas the later seasons were more interested in the nurture side of the argument, that there's trauma here, that he never became a compassionate and loving person because his parents never instilled it in him. Sideshow Bob argues that his parents actually did love him, in the sense that they made him strong, made him the richest, most ruthless man in town. Okay, I guess that's one way to define strength. I'm actually kind of glad that Mr. Burns' history is so messy, that his timeline doesn't provide a clean answer to what his Rosebud actually was. Honestly, it's kind of apt that we don't know for sure. At some point, his story isn't about that. He had so many more chances than the average person to forge a new path. The C. Montgomery Burns timeline is one of those classic cautionary tales about how power magnifies things. Like when things go badly for someone like Grandpa, it only gets passed along to his son. But when someone like Mr. Burns goes bad, he makes everything around him bad too. Every story does need a villain though. Mr. Burns knew that better than everyone. So thank goodness we were given such an entertaining one. Let's all raise a glass and a toast to the greatest secondary character in Simpsons history. Mr. Burns, from the bottom of my heart, go to hell, you old bastard. The Simpsons and its 30-year legacy, this concept always looms over the conversation. The newest episode measured against the golden age. However, with any fandom-related topic, there continues to be a debate surrounding the Simpsons golden age, as it can vary wildly from person to person. So that makes me wonder, what exactly is the golden age of the Simpsons? When did it occur? And, well, is the golden
Can this level fucking stop with those? Oh my god, it's just so luck-based. Like, okay, that pattern I just got is literally impossible to dodge. Like, what the fuck is the point of patterns like this? Okay, I mean, I know it's not impossible to dodge, but my point stands, because it's like... It's actual bullshit.
extremely nebulous and subjective, so let's at least try to get on the same page about what we're talking about. Generally speaking, when people refer to a TV show's golden age, it refers to the period where the show's output was at its strongest. The critical reception, the fandom reception, you can even factor in the show's rating and general pop culture footprint into making this determination. For more serialized shows with a rotating cast, a golden age can refer to a specific combination of characters. Often, a show's golden age arrives early in its run, as the show is still building itself up, although this is not necessarily mandatory. Usually the term Renaissance is used when there is a late series improvement. In addition to the quality level, there is a time element in this equation. You can't call something a golden age when all you're really talking about is one or two really good episodes of a show. That only works if there are only 5 episodes total, and 2 of them are really, really good. You're typically talking about a period of time where the show is at its best, cranking out one gem after another. Now, a golden age does not preclude the series from having dud episodes during it. Even at a show's best, sometimes it will turn out something subpar. In addition, the idea of a golden age does not automatically mean that there are no good episodes outside that era. There is a consistency factor that should be considered. Not only is the show producing good episodes, but they are doing so at a consistent rate. Now, the tricky thing about The Simpsons is that it's a status quo show. It's not like The Office, for example, where some fans might say that the Steve Carell seasons are all the golden age, and that when he left, that's when it ended. Or they'll cut it down further and say that the Golden Age ended when, say, Jim and
What's a
Pam
good
got
timing
married.
for that?
Or they'll say it started in season
Okay,
2
let's see.
with the Dundies. I'm in that camp, by the way. With The Simpsons, you have considerably less to latch onto. A character like Maude Flanders could be killed, but is the argument that this is the end because Maude is gone? Is she that important? That Maude Flanders was
let's
the
see.
pillar of classic Simpsons, gosh darn it.
Okay, so
When you're making the
if I go through right behind one of these, then I'm dead. But if I go through... Okay, if I go through when I'm in between one of those, then I'm good. What? Okay. I guess I just need to be as close to one of the, like... Yeah, I guess I just have to be really close to one of them. I don't know what else to say, because I can't figure it out. Yeah, of course. Don't do that shit. Oh my god, man. Like, when that happens, what are you even supposed to do? Okay, yeah, it is as close as you can be to the edge. Okay. So I just have to be really close to... Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we go. No, that makes sense. If I can just learn to dodge these triplets consistently, then I think I should be fine. Oh my god, unless if I keep on dying to shit like that, then no matter how much I play, it's just like this. Did you see that? What was that? The ceiling was covered in death. Nah, I should just kept on holding, right? I don't know if I want to test something with those singles. Okay, let's see. Oh my, okay, I see. Okay, so the spacing between everything seems to be lies. I see. It was just a lie that I fell for. Yeah, okay. Oh no, it's fine, you just have to account for the fact that shit's closing in on you faster than the fucking speed of light for some reason. Okay, so you can actually leave, but then you have to fuck off as soon as possible. Of course I hit that, you know. I fucking can't believe that shit. How did I mess up? How did I die there? How did I die there? That could have been an easy 70 seconds minimum.
Todd Flanders' argument, you're usually saying that this is emblematic of how the show lost its way, that this is a pattern of behavior. After all, the show prides itself on how it bucks continuity and refreshes from zero at the beginning of every story. That's why I'm against the idea that a single episode was the downfall of The Simpsons. I think that's the biggest crock of bullshit in Simpsons fandom history, to be honest. If you hate Season 9, just say you hate Season 9. Jeez. We don't have to put it all on the shoulders of poor Principal Skinner. I don't want to get further into the weeds yet of defining what's golden and what's not, but you have an idea how messy figuring out is. Since Simpsons fans are often making a strictly qualitative argument, there's not going to be a definitive answer. Everyone is different and wonderful and will have their biases and preferences that shape them. So in trying to define when the Simpsons Golden Age is, all we can really do is look at the general consensus and pick out
Of course.
trends. Which seasons are part of the Simpsons Golden Age?
4 times. 4 times
Okay,
edge
first,
blocks.
let's do a quick rundown of the different
Wow.
showrunner eras of The Simpsons as a refresher, just since we're going to be name-dropping them a bunch. The first 2 seasons were showrun by the trio of Matt Groening, James L. Brooks, and Sam Simon. Then in seasons 3 and 4, the duo of Al Jean and Mike Reiss took over. Then when they departed, they brought in David Merkin to run seasons 5 and 6. After that, they promoted writing duo Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein for seasons 7 and 8. Then Mike Scully took over for 9 through 12, with 9 having a handful of episodes run by all the previous showrunners. Then in season 13, Al Jean returned and ran things all the way through present day, with Matt Selman showrunning the majority starting in season 33. There's a lot of smaller nuances in here, and obviously there are many writers who had great influence over the seasons they worked on, but this is the very simplified top-down summary of the various eras. From being on the internet for a while, I've seen so many different takes on which seasons are the Golden Age and which aren't, but I wanted to see what the current feeling is on the subject. So I decided to ask everyone. I created a poll asking to select which seasons they thought were part of the Simpsons Golden Age and sent it to my YouTube and Twitter followers. I ended up getting over 3,600 responses. Wow. Now, from a methodology standpoint, it's worth noting that there is a ton of sample bias here. I'm asking people who specifically follow me on YouTube or Twitter. Our take on The Simpsons isn't going to represent the whole population. Anyway, here are the results. As you can see, the general consensus appears to be strongest for seasons 3 through 8, spanning the Gene and Reese, David Merkin, and Oakley and Weinstein years. Seasons 4 through 7 were most popular, all polling above 90%, with season 6 being peak of the mountain. I want to meet these 5% of people who are so anti-season 6. I bet they have an interesting perspective. Seasons 3 and 8 are equally popular in the poll, interestingly enough. Season 3 sometimes gets booted for being a little slower paced than the later years. People into the more rapid-fire gag-driven later years might not be apt to include Season 3. And Season 8 is occasionally excluded because some fans feel a sense of fatigue setting in, especially in the back half of that season. There are some divisive episodes here, and it could be argued that certain trends originated around this time. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised how well Season 8 did in this poll. It's always had its share of detractors, but time has clearly been kind to it. Simpsons fandom has always had an odd relationship with Season 1. I think that's true for most TV shows, that first season being the weird one where they're working out the kinks. With its rougher animation and its different comedic style and pacing, it's a fairly popular fan opinion that Season 2 is when The Simpsons gets good. Some fans even suggest skipping it to new viewers. Typically, the biggest points of contention with Simpsons fans are whether to include Seasons 2 and 9. 3 through 8 is the generally accepted Golden Age, but some fans like to tack on Season 2 at the beginning, Season 9 at the end, or both. 2 through 9 is a fairly common opinion, for example. The quote-unquote problem with Season 2 is that it's so dang schmaltzy, which isn't for everyone. From a jokes and pacing perspective, it doesn't feel much like those later seasons. It does have some super popular and acclaimed episodes, like Bart Gets an F and Lisa's Substitute, which some folks would want to put in their golden years. Season 9 is certainly the elephant in the room, easily the most divisive year in Simpsons history. I mean, it polled at nearly 50%. How much more split can a fan base be? Some fans absolutely love Season 9 and think it's about on par as Season 8. There are indeed a ton of very popular and iconic episodes in Season 9. Other fans don't think it's nearly as good, but it's still solid enough to be the final year of the Golden Age. Whereas other Simpsons fans think it's too hit or miss overall, or falls off considerably in its second half. Some of the more controversial episodes of Season 9 make it a good cutoff point for others. And some might just not be into Mike Scully. After that, we get our bell curve downward all the way to Season 20. About 30% of the respondents went all the way to Season 10, and there's probably a decent overlap with the Season 1 crowd. These Season 1 through 10 voters are clearly the most even-handed Simpsons fans, giving each showrunner 2 years of the Golden Age. There were some votes that came in all the way up to Season 20. About 1 to 2% of Simpsons fans voted for these later years. The question itself is a little biased, assuming there is a Simpsons Golden Age and asking people to pick, but clearly there is a subsection of Simpsons fans who reject that framing and consider all or most of the first 20 seasons golden. Writers and producers of The Simpsons themselves have argued against that narrative as well. We as Simpsons fans have constructed the idea of there being a golden age, but just because a bunch of fans reach a consensus doesn't mean it's valid. There are so many delusional fan bases on the internet. Is the Simpsons Golden Age actually real? Or are we winding ourselves up for no reason?
I think I'll just play how I got like 76, which is I simply didn't.
Over the years,
any fancy
Simpsons
stats.
writers have done plenty of interviews, and this is a topic that
I did
comes
like
up
no
from time to
teleportation
time.
on my 76.
And we have gotten plenty of quotes and arguments striking back
So,
against
clearly
that
that's the
fandom
stat.
narrative. In 2007, Matt Groening said this to the Los Angeles Daily News.
Yeah, see?
You always hear that the show isn't as good as it used to be, but people always compare the new shows to the memories of their favorite episodes, back when the show surprised them. You've got to have an open mind, and for some people, it's impossible. Nostalgia clouds their thinking. In a 2020 AV Club interview, Al Jean expressed similar sentiments. It's very hard to compete with something they saw when they were 10 years old. I remember when I was 10, reading Spider-Man comics with Steve Ditko, the artist. And it's hard for anything to compare to those because you're a kid and you're discovering it. I think many would agree that the rose-colored glasses effect tends to be a real thing in human psychology. That the first Simpsons episodes you would view, especially when you were in your formative years, you're going to have an extra sense of reverence for them. There's both a novelty and nostalgia factor in early Simpsons favor. You think back to an episode like Homie the Clown, and think about the all-time great moments, like this one, and this one, and this one. You don't really think about those weird references to Tom Bosley, Chachi, and Starsky and Hutch that don't really land. You don't question whether this ending is too arch and silly to be satisfying. I frickin' love Homie the Clown. I think it's a great episode. That's why I picked it for this example. When you're thinking of something you consider good, it's easy to hand-wave away any of those potential points of criticism. Can we totally disqualify a modern Simpsons episode for being too silly about its plot resolution when Homie the Clown was behaving similarly in Season 6? Was Homie the Clown the start of bad Simpsons writing? Obviously, I'm being glib when I ask that. That's just the kind of critical lens we often use when evaluating media, especially when something is brand new. We like Homie the Clown, so we are more apt to say that it earned that silly ending. I think, to some degree, Matt Groening and Al Jean are correct about human nature. That when evaluating a new Simpsons episode, it is easy to inadvertently compare it to an idealized memory rather than the old episode itself. We should also remember that, even in the so-called golden age of The Simpsons, the early internet fandom was not at all on the same page about its greatness. Al Jean, in that same interview, said this. Back then, when the 4th season was airing, I was there and people were sort of dismissive of it. I remember people going, "Oh, The Simpsons has gotten too silly, it's lost its way. What's this monorail show?" A lot of people didn't like the monorail show at first. And now you say, as I've heard, that people voted it the best ever. So I think you can't judge relatively what episodes are better or worse based on what people react to now. This is a very extreme example, given the popularity of Marge vs. the Monorail. However, thanks to archivists, we do have some of the receipts from alt.tv.simpsons. If you've never gone to the Simpsons archive to read the review section of their episode guides, I strongly recommend checking them out. I consider doing a whole video about them. They are so dang interesting. The review sections start being archived in Season 5, and you can already tell that opinions were mixed. Here are 3 reviews from the Conan O'Brien classic, Homer Goes to College.
Don't get me wrong, I really liked Cape Fear, and the B-Sharps was kind of good in a weird way, but the college episode was the worst Simpsons episode I've ever seen. I've loved every other episode. I'm not at all critical when I watch, but what happened? Are there new writers? I'm embarrassed. I've gotten so many people into this show, and now I look stupid.
I found this episode to be utterly devoid of any plot, and there were extremely few funny parts. I normally laugh hysterically at least once during an OFF episode, but not this week. I sincerely hope the quality of these shows improve, else I might just have to only watch each episode 3 times.
After watching the last 3 episodes, I have realised that the show sucks now. Oh, it's not easy for me to say that, but come on, they're not putting any thought into it anymore. Side gags, the characters are losing their individual personalities, the storylines have become a series of non sequiturs. The whole thing just reminds me of the last season of Moonlighting, and we all know how ugly that got.
Well, I'm gonna say ouch for Moonlighting. Also, big thanks to our 3 guests for reading those cranky reviews. Check them out if you haven't already. Now, obviously, I cherry-picked these examples, as not all the Homer Goes to College user reviews were negative. With the nature of the internet, you're gonna find somebody who absolutely hates every new episode. However, when considering how The Simpsons evolved from showrunner to showrunner, it makes sense that longtime fans would have mixed reactions to these philosophical shifts. Remember, their point of comparison would be Season 2 stuff, like Dancin' Homer and Bart's Dog Gets an F. A zany episode like Homer Goes to College or Homer the Vigilante comes along, and you'd be like, what the hell even is this show anymore? In a commentary, Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein said that they read the old Usenet reviews, would see the negative comments, and even admitted being disappointed that there were still internet cranks when they were running the show in seasons 7 and 8. 95% of fans today say that season 7 is part of the golden age, but back then, there was a perception that The Simpsons were over the hill. These criticisms that kept rolling in from the internet, studio executives, and the media. It got so bad and was such a continuous thing that the series literally made the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show in response. That's our smoking gun that this did indeed happen. Its thesis is very clear that they believed the show was as good as ever. It was just the audience's perception that had shifted. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense why the Simpsons writers would feel skeptical about the fans' instant reactions to the new episodes. We internet people are not the most reliable bunch. Maybe instead, we should look at the more measurable reception of The Simpsons over the years. For example, we could look at their Emmy wins for the animated television program over the years. They won in 1990, 91, 95, 97, 98, 2000, 2001, 2003, 2006, and 2008.
Can it stop doing this fucking double attack? Please!
All the way in 2019 for Mad About the Toy. Award voting is always going to be fickle and kind of stupid in general. You should all hear the audio commentary still grumbling about the time Claymation Easter beat Radio Bart in 92. But given the series suddenly went an entire
oh my god, I swear for the last
there's only 2 explanations.
10 attacks.
The Emmy voters think the
80% of them was a double attack.
Or there's so much competition in animation, The Simpsons kept getting shut out. I thought last year's Pixelated and Afraid was one of the strongest Simpsons efforts in quite some time, and even it lost out to Arcane because there's so much excellent animation now. We could also point to declining television ratings.
Holy shit!
But I've never thought this was a great metric. One, because all TV ratings for a series declines over time. Heck, these days TV ratings are such a waste now, the Simpsons ratings are pretty dang solid. Secondly, since when are ratings an indicator of quality? All the ratings chart demonstrates is that The Simpsons stopped being the hottest thing on the planet. And we all know that happened. See, that's the problem with any Golden Age discussion in general. Like with most artistic endeavors, it's not easily measurable. You look at a series' body of work, do a critical analysis over time, and declare a cutoff point. There are objective facets to television criticism, such as whether the story beats make sense, joke construction, pacing, etc. But artistic taste often gets mixed into the equation. One person's lazy ending is another person's hilarious subversion of
No,
convention.
I gotta share this
We've
committed.
got to
I
a
wasn't
sense
sure
of
because it
when
looked
the
like there was
fans
gonna be a
think
thing at
Golden
the
Age
edge.
was, and some counter arguments by the staff. So, what now? Is The Simpsons just permanently stuck being dogged by its legacy going forward? I've purposely avoided inserting my own opinion too much into this so far, instead summarizing the debate itself. But here's where I land on it. When I created the poll, I personally voted for seasons 1 through 8. Yes, I am one of those people. But you all probably saw that coming with all the season 1 cheerleading I do. At the same time, with all my modern Simpsons cheerleading, it might be surprising that I take a fairly traditionalist stance, that there is indeed a golden age of The Simpsons. I understand why many aren't into season 1, as it does feel totally different from the later stuff. But for me, I still feel that Simpsons essence to season 1, that subversive point of view that defines the series. And I think the episodes are strong enough quality-wise to be included. For the end of the golden years, there are a lot of small facets I would point to, explaining what got worse after season 8. There are a lot of the typical things you've heard before, characterization changes, pointing out the joke too much, cop-out endings, repetitive plot formats, gimmicky guest stars. Even The Simpsons themselves have referenced a bunch of these criticisms. Mostly I tend to exclude the Scully years because I don't find them as balanced as something like the Merkin era. They stretched the rubber band just a little too far and lost something, in my view. But admittedly, even that is more of a taste reason. However, I think time is the main culprit here. Time has always been kind of the villain of The Simpsons, as it has created so many weird issues with the show. Fundamentally, The Simpsons has been on the air for so long, a golden age is inevitable. From both a production side and a fandom side, it has to happen because of human nature. I think Al Jean and Matt Groening are right in a sense about nostalgia, that longtime fans are never going to be able to watch a new Simpsons with totally fresh eyes. But I also don't think that's wrong. The Simpsons chose to continue on for over 30 years, and when making that decision, it comes with a lot of baggage. The series will inevitably repeat itself, putting different spins on tired story concepts. Yes, The Simpsons is a status quo show, but every Homer Lisa episode paradoxically ends up standing on the shoulders of every other Homer Lisa episode. We've seen Lisa the Greek, we've seen Lisa's Pony. It becomes more and more challenging presenting their relationship in a fresh way. The writers will try creative, unconventional spins, and some will fail. In addition, the audience starts recognizing patterns and tendencies, and the show becomes formulaic. After 20 years, we have a sense of what an Al Jean Simpsons episode feels like. We've learned their tricks, understand their sensibilities. I knew when they did that fan contest a while back, they were going to kill off Ricardo Bamba because that's the kind of funny thing that Al Jean would do. You just get to know people after a while, and the same could be said about audiences with their TV shows. Of course, longtime viewers of this YouTube channel probably expected me to say something like that. I've always believed that after a certain point, making a truly great season of TV is harder than the previous one, just because of all the things you've done already. It gets harder continuing to carry that torch, doggedly keeping standards high. I remember when reading John Ortvid's Unauthorized History of the Simpsons book, they were talking about writing during the Oakley and Weinstein years, describing how it had sort of a fraternity vibe, where the writers would stay up super late, trying to get the best possible jokes into their episodes. And there's an anecdote about Sideshow Bob's last gleaming, when working late trying to come up with a name of the general character. Finally, someone came up with a name, Colonel Hap Hapablap, and everyone laughed, but it was kind of a laugh like, This is my life. My life is grains of sand in the hourglass to arrive at Colonel Hap Hapablap. And we were all just kind of laughing at the waste of our lives, I think. But Bill and Josh heard the laughter, and it was contagious. And they were like, Hap Hapablap, Colonel Hap Hapablap. And they just kept saying it, and it was getting funnier and funnier. And that's the name of the guy in the show, Colonel Hap Hapablap. I'm not bringing up this anecdote to slam Bill and Josh for being workaholics. They're honestly my favorite showrunners, and I think it's a minor miracle that seasons 7 and 8 turned out so amazing. They worked themselves to death to give us those seasons. They had the whole deck stacked against them. But you could imagine why that kind of process isn't sustainable long term. Burnout is inevitable, and you can't expect the staff to want to put themselves through that forever. Simpsons writers clearly work hard on every script they do. They shouldn't be on permanent crunch time just to give us the quote-unquote perfect version of season 35. If that's
Fucking
even
tops
possible
and
for
bottoms,
season 35
man.
of anything. The Simpsons had a beautiful, magical run-up in the 1990s where everything they were doing was brand new, bringing adult animation back to primetime TV. It's just an impossible standard to live up to. Those early seasons are when everyone collectively decided, this is what The Simpsons is. This is the show. So when a showrunner takes things in a different direction or tweaks the formula, it can feel like the sky is falling. Just like the writers, fans are also storytellers, constructing narratives about what the show is and what it isn't. Who's to say that the show can't be a wackadoo farce full of Jackie L's and chloroform jokes? Who decides that? Is The Simpsons meant to be that inflexible? I'm curious where everyone else lands on this topic, this nebulous golden age that we all agree exists, but can't nail down exactly. It's something fun to argue about, at the very least. At the same time, I don't think The Simpsons golden age is a narrative that should dominate the show. I think there's enough room to say that there is a golden age, but also they made plenty of good episodes in the later years. Both statements can be true. However, the one thing The Simpsons should never be is stagnant. We can never return to the golden years, and the writers will never be able to fully recapture them. But as long as they're still trying to change the formula and reinvent themselves, I'll try my best to forget about season 6. At least for 30 minutes on Sunday night. Bart Simpson is one of the most popular students at Springfield Elementary. Maybe. Sometimes. Okay, it mostly depends on the episode. But he is most certainly considered more popular than his sister. Because of the...
What is Vere? Is this... Is Vere unrated? I mean, at least I assume it's unrated, right? Because I have no clue what Vere could even be. Wow, I have no clue what this is. Is it on your account? No. Well, then I have no clue. Oh wait, it could be... Oh wait, no, but because I just checked for like random levels. Yeah.
Thus, the series tackles the subject more frequently with Lisa, introducing her to new characters who might want to be her friend. But after 30 plus seasons of this dynamic, it starts bringing into question which of these two are truly the social butterfly. Today we're looking at the battle between the status quo and the character actions. Over the course of 32 seasons, has Lisa made more friends than Bart?
Wow, that music is extremely loud. Like bogglable.
Yeah, I know.
Holy
this sounds like one of those internet gotchas where the answer is always the opposite of what you'd initially expect.
Again?
But I think there's a legitimate
Again?
argument for either case.
Again!
Bart has more status quo friends, and folks always seem to be drawn into his adventures and schemes. Then again, the show designs entire plots around introducing new friends to Lisa. For this analysis, I'm going to look at confirmed friendships and romantic relationships only. That means no one-way friendships or one-sided crushes. We're looking for mutual rapport, that both characters actually like each other. Hanging out, doing activities, or going to social events are good indicators. We're also going to stick mostly to characters who speak. Do all these kids consider themselves Lisa's friends? Do all these boys personally like Bart? I don't know. Look, this is just a ridiculous breakdown of past relationships. There's obviously no exact science to this, so anything super ambiguous we'll discuss at the end. Oh yeah, one more thing. We're also only including characters around Bart or Lisa's age. It makes the messy analysis slightly cleaner, and also, let's face it, if present-day adults were included, Lisa wins. Put it on the screen. Lisa wins. For this comparison, I'm going to use this scoreboard to keep track, and we're going to do it in 5 rounds, 5 distinct friend categories. First up, the status quo friends. Ready, set, go. This set of characters is the easiest to define. These are the regulars who have shown up in multiple episodes, often as Bart or Lisa's friends. For Bart, we've got Richard, Lewis, Nelson, and of course, Bart's friend. Let's also throw Martin into this group, since Homer considers him a friend in Saturdays of Thunder, and he goes on that road trip in Shelbyville Adventure. I'm not including Wendell, by the way, as there's never really much between him and Bart. For Lisa, this list is trickier to define. I think we can safely include Janie here, as she's hung out with Lisa on multiple occasions. She's considered a fair-weather friend. I think we can also add Sherry and Terry to this list. They eat lunch with Lisa and hang out in Lard of the Dance, and then there are other examples of them going to birthday parties or offering to be her friend. These two are definitely her frenemies, but you can't be frenemies without at least being friends, I guess. As you can tell, things are already getting dicey for Lisa in this study. In the status quo of the show, it's clear that Bart has the more stable group of chums. It's really just Nelson who often switches to an antagonistic role. Let's move on to round 2, Friends and Enemies, which should be slightly more advantageous.
What the fuck is wrong with this level?
Alright, these are folks who become Bart or Lisa's friends for a specific episode. Maybe they're a new kid, maybe they're voiced by a celebrity, maybe they're a series regular getting a spotlight episode. The point is, these characters clearly make a connection with Bart or Lisa, even if it's only for this one episode. For Bart, we have Laura Powers, Ralph Wiggum, Donnie, Bashir, Charlie, Eric, Ross and Tyler, T-Rex, and Diggs. Now, Laura Powers isn't into Bart romantically, but she does hang out and confide in him, so we'll put her in this category. Characters like T-Rex and Donnie have major blow-ups with Bart, but they both turn things around in the end. And you could argue that Bart never actually likes Ralph, but due to the sheer amount of hanging out and having fun together, I think we should count him. Lisa's list is more extensive, as she gets these storylines regularly. She's got Ralph Wiggum in Season 4, Allison in Season 6, then Aaron, Ben, Dean, and Rick in Season 7. Then it's Alex Whitney, Jesse Grass, Ronaldo, Michael D'Amico, Juliet Hobbs, Isabel Gutierrez, Toomey, Harper Jambowski, Sam Monroe, and Addie. Ralph and Jesse are kind of like Laura Powers,
that was 25 seconds of the same attack!
But both are more platonic in the end. Much like Lisa's status quo friends, this is an extremely contentious crew, especially in the later seasons. Alex Whitney is condescending, Lisa fights with Isabel over politics, Toomey was initially being paid by Homer and Marge.
What are the odds of that attack happening? What are the fucking odds? What are the fucking odds of that attack happening? Where's the probability trigger? No, I was thinking earlier that it might be possible to hide, but obviously not.
Addie ends up using Lisa, and Harper is just kind of the worst in general. For both Bart and Lisa, these characters' introductions are often bookended with a goodbye. Usually it's because it's impractical to keep having Daniel Radcliffe or Emily Blunt on the show each week. The two characters who probably had the best chances of recurring were probably Bashir and Sam. Both are Tress MacNeille characters who ended their episodes on friendly terms. There's no plot reason for both of them to disappear either. It's honestly a bummer the writers never did anything with either of them. It's like, sorry guys, this is a status quo show. Get out of here. Bart and Lisa have had several boyfriends and or girlfriends from over the years. Since we're looking at mutual friendships in this study, we can't include one-sided crushes. So characters like Corey, Blake, Sarah Plainenthal, or Melody wouldn't be included. Same with minor characters where we don't have a lot of information, like Langdon Auger or Sherry and Terry's boy-crazy cousin. For this round, we're starting with Lisa. You'll understand why in a moment. Lisa's romances include Millhouse, Nelson, Hugh Parkfield, Thelonious, Luke Stetson, Edmund, this Portuguese boy, Nick, Lucas, Jack DeForest, Brendan, Colin, Lisa's 3 girlfriends in the future, and probably her college roommate. Even if this never became a romance, she's at least Lisa's friend. Overall, a pretty straightforward list. Bucking her usual trend, Lisa actually has regulars like Millhouse and Nelson as a sort of romantic baseline throughout the series. As a result, she tends to get involved in more love triangles when a new romantic interest gets introduced. Lisa's romantic storylines are much more easygoing compared to her tumultuous platonic relationships. Most of them are centered around a mutual interest. And Lisa only gets dumped once. Usually her relationships are broken off due to characters realizing they want different things or simply being forced to leave each other. As for Bart, well, he's had relationships with Jessica Lovejoy, Greta Wolfcastle, Gina Vendetti, Jenda, This Summer Romance Girl, Darcy, Mary Spuckler, Jenny, Nikki McKenna, Kamala, Shonda Chalmers, This 5th Grade Girl, Annika Van Houten, and Terry but not Sherry. Now, this might sound like an innocuous group, but oh boy do things get weird. Bart ends up fighting with like half the girls on this list, sometimes physically, but usually it's Bart's emotions that get beaten up. Also, Bart almost gets married 3 different times. He considers eloping with Darcy in season 18 to be a father to her child. Don't ask.
Like, actually.
He almost gets forced into a marriage with Mary Spuckler in season 19, and he mates with Kamala in their Avatar parody. Bart's love life is such a mess that the show ended up calling this out in season 24. It's clear when comparing Bart and Lisa's romances side by side that the writers prefer looking at the wacky and chaotic nature of love in Bart's storylines, whereas Lisa's are more grounded and passion-driven. I think gender stereotypes definitely play a factor here in the story selection, but also Bart and Lisa's general temperament and maturity levels. Lisa can't relate to her friends, but makes deep romantic bonds. Bart makes friends easily and fights with girls. Interestingly, Bart is given more individual episodes centered specifically on romance. I guess when you're Lisa and you've got Millhouse and Nelson always waiting in the wings, you don't need as many boyfriends of the week. Moving on. Next, let's look at examples where Bart and Lisa are either accepted into a new social circle or just randomly hang out with people. These are generally one-off situations, not necessarily friend of the week stuff, but usually related to a larger story topic. Bart hangs out with Jimbo Dolphin Kearney for an entire afternoon. And although the bullies later turn on him, Jimbo clearly likes Bart here, and they're chill enough that we could call this a very temporary friendship. We also have these 3 military academy cadets who have speaking roles. They're suspicious of Bart here, but have definitely accepted him into their group. In season 21, Bart attends a birthday party of a mysterious kid named Dylan that he used to play with. When he travels to Canada, he hangs out with Milhouse. And finally, he's on an esports team with Sophie Krastowski. Lisa had a sleepover in season 3 with Becky, Wanda, and this white-haired girl. In season 20, Homer and Marge throw her a party, and she befriends these 3 popular kids, who all take pictures and add her on Facebook. The following year, she meets up with 3 Wiccans and joins their group. She goes to an arts camp and bonds with Aisha and Sarah. On a cruise, she befriends a boy from the Caribbean and a girl from Singapore. And in Brick Like Me, Lisa bonds with 3 older girls over some dated reference. Lisa definitely has the advantage in this category. Compared to Bart, she tends to pursue her interests and passions more actively, which provides opportunities to meet new characters who share those interests. Whereas Bart is more relaxed, would prefer to bum around and hang out with whoever he bumps into. Both are certainly valid ways to meet new people, but Lisa's tends to be easier to write into a structured story. When Bart does develop a new interest, he often draws in his existing friends. Boy, that established secondary cast is really killing Bart's numbers here, huh? Here's where things get especially messy. These are the characters who don't fit into one of the other groups or are just plain questionable in general. I think most people would agree that from Cape Fear, Lisa's pen pal Anya would count as a friend, so we'll put her on the board. In Behind the Laughter, the voiceover describes Richie Rich as one of Bart's good friends, so we'll add him too. Samantha Stanky is really more of Milhouse's friend. Then again, Bart is cool with reading comics with her and going to the movies, so we could argue this is one of those friends by proxy situations. Bart plays video games with Jeremy Jailbird in season 17. They clearly get along, so I'm inclined to include him. However, if we include Jeremy, then we should probably include Martin for Lisa, and I already did a whole video on why those two aren't really friends. We'll leave these two off. Then we've got the Super Friends: Database, Cosign, Email, Ham, and Report Card. Lisa's already in this club and seemingly enjoys being there. Then again, Bart also joins, despite how annoying they are. There's a case that these guys would only count for Lisa. However, since they're literally called the Super Friends, I'm inclined to count them for both. In season 30, both Bart and Lisa join Bossy Riot to do pranks all over Springfield. You could argue that the characters don't like each other and they're just doing this for the cause. On the other hand, they are having fun doing these pranks, and there is a level of trust in being in this group. Following this logic, we've got these two girls from separate vocations that Lisa joins up with. The way one of them gushes about what Lisa said to Skinner suggests that they warmed up to her, so I think they count as temporary friends. Same logic for Bart and Todd Flanders, as he comes along for the Shelbyville Crusade. We could also throw in their mini-golf agreement as another example for them. In season 19's Apocalypse Cow, Lisa brings in Compost and Solar Panel, two teenagers from her animal rights group, to help save a cow. Once again, they might be doing this only for the cause, but if they're willing to help Lisa out of a jam in the middle of the night, you'd think they'd have to be on pretty friendly terms. Then we've got the two foreign exchange students. In season 1, Lisa and Adil have a heated debate over politics, but make up in the end. Adil asks friend, and they shake hands in agreement. Similarly, in Trails of Horror 4, Bart and Uter eat candy together, and Bart declares them friends. Both of these are arguably self-serving, one-sided friendships, but it's kind of a wash since both Bart and Lisa have one. And last but not least, there's the mysterious party guests, Gus Hubner and Toby. Homer and Marge throw a party for Lisa and invite a bunch of her past acquaintances, but only this Gus Hubner kid shows up. They were on a soccer team together 2 years ago. He came to the party, but Lisa is more puzzled to see him than excited, so don't know what the deal is. Then there's this Toby kid who went to Bart's birthday at Wally Weasel's. Bart asks him if he lost weight when he goes by. Is Toby one of Bart's friends? Sure, I guess. I'm so very tired at this point. If you think some of these examples were stretches, you should see the full list of friends according to the Simpsons wiki. No, Alaska Nebraska is not Lisa's friend. No, Proto Ralph is not Lisa's friend. No, Sonic the Hedgehog is not Lisa's friend. You wiki editors are out of control. Also, why do these background students all have names and extensive appearance breakdowns? I never knew Sophie Jensen was so deep. And that's pretty much the list. By this completely scientific and not at all arbitrary analysis, it comes out to 66 friends for Lisa, 51 for Bart. I think Bart's list is probably higher if we throw in a lot of unnamed and non-speaking roles of kids who come to his parties. Maybe all these nerds should count. Honestly, the exact number is less important. Going through the specific examples was more about finding overall trends for each character over time. I think what's weird about The Simpsons, and why I wanted to look into this, is that the actual status quo of the show says something about Bart, and especially Lisa, that might not actually be true. That Bart's popularity and Lisa's unpopularity might be more of a status quo thing than a character thing.
Right about here, in Dallas, Texas, American President John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963. The accused assassin was a man named Lee Harvey Oswald. After being held in custody for less than 2 days, Oswald himself would meet a violent end. According to a subsequent investigation, Oswald had fired 3 rounds from the Texas Schoolbook Depository. Police recovered 3 shell casings and a bolt-action rifle from the 6th floor of the building. But the shooting of Oswald sparked immediate suspicions of conspiracy. Suspicions that persist to this day and have driven most Americans to reject the government's conclusion that Oswald acted alone. The arguments for and against conspiracy take many shapes and forms. Far too many, in fact, to do them all justice in a single video. Is that in this video, I want to zoom in and focus on a very narrow slice of this case. Specifically, the events surrounding the Texas Schoolbook Depository. What exactly happened inside this building from where the shots that killed the president are believed to have fired? In September of 1963, a young man named Wesley Frazier received a call from an employment agency. There was a potential job opening at the Texas Schoolbook Depository. On September the 13th, Frazier made his way from Irving, Texas, down to central Dallas. He met with Roy Trull, the superintendent of the building, and was hired on the spot. Back in Irving, Frazier lived with his older sister, Miranda. A few houses down the street lived a woman named Ruth Payne.
What the fuck was that?
On October the
What a
14th,
throw,
Randall
man.
and Payne had a cup of coffee at the house of a neighbor. Payne brought along a friend and Russian immigrant named Marina Oswald, the wife of Lee Oswald. Marina could barely speak any English and had been staying with Payne for a few weeks after her husband's unemployment.
The subject of Lee looking for work and that he hadn't found work for a week came up while we were having coffee. And Mrs. Randall mentioned that her younger brother, Wesley Frazier, thought they needed another person at the Texas Schoolbook Depository where Wesley worked.
Payne and Marina returned home, spoke with Roy Truly over the phone, and secured a job interview on behalf of Lee Oswald. The following morning, he went down to the book depository and began his first day of work on October the 16th. So, an acquaintance with whom Oswald's wife was currently staying had a casual conversation with a neighbor. That neighbor happened to have a brother who recently got employed at the book depository. This prompted his wife to ask the acquaintance to call the superintendent of the building to inquire about the vacancies.
I told Mrs. Payne that to send Oswald down, and I would talk to him, that I didn't have anything in mind for him of a permanent nature, but if he was suited, we could possibly use him for a brief time.
The position was not only temporary, but only existed due to a temporary shortage of staff.
It was the end of our fall rush. If it hadn't existed a week or 2 weeks longer, or if we had not been using some of our regular boys putting down this plywood floor, we would not have had any need for Lee Oswald at that time, which is a tragic thing for me to think about.
But it gets even more tragic because Oswald was not the only one to apply for a job.
I might have sent Oswald to work in a warehouse 2 blocks away. Oswald and another fellow reported for work on the same day, and I needed one of them for the depository building. I picked Oswald.
If Oswald was somehow entangled in a conspiracy, and the aim of that conspiracy was for him to become employed at the book depository, this roundabout sequence of events is a very strange way to go about it. As the name implies, the Texas Schoolbook Depository was in the business of selling books. For $1.25 an hour, Oswald's job was to prepare the books for shipping. He did so by filling out forms and transporting cartons of books between the upper floors and the first. The building had 3 elevators, 2 staircases, and was 7 stories tall. In the northwest corner, one stairway and two freight elevators provided access to all 7 floors. A small passenger elevator near the front entrance stopped at level 4, while stories 1 and 2 were connected by a second flight of stairs. Lacking a driver's license, Oswald relied on Wesley Frazier to carpool between Irving and Dallas every Friday evening and Monday morning. He spent workdays at the rooming house in Dallas while spending the weekends with his wife and daughters in Irving. But on Thursday morning, November the 21st, the day before the assassination, Oswald decided to deviate from this routine.
I was standing there on the first floor getting the orders in, and Lee said, "Could I ride home with you this afternoon?" And I said, "Sure, like I told you, you can go home with me anytime you want to. Like I say, anytime you want to go see your wife, that is all right with me." Lee had never gone home in the middle of the week before, so I asked him why. He stated that he was going home to get some curtain rods for his apartment. I asked if he was going home on Friday as well, and he said no.
Frazier drove Oswald back to Irving, where he arrived unannounced at the household of Ruth Payne. Both Payne and Marina were surprised to see Oswald on a Thursday. They assumed he'd come to make amends with Marina due to an argument they had had a few days before.
Did your husband give any reason for coming home on Thursday?
He said that he was lonely because he hadn't come the preceding weekend and he wanted to make his peace with me.
Was anything said about curtain rods or his taking curtain rods to town the following day?
No, I didn't have any.
He didn't say anything like that.
No.
The next day, Oswald said goodbye to his wife and left the Payne residence about 7:15. Atop a dresser in the bedroom, he left behind his wedding ring. Oswald was next seen walking down the street by Jimmy Randall, carrying a package. He was soon joined by Frazier, and the two of them took a seat in his car to begin their commute.
When you got in the car, did you say anything to Oswald, or did he say anything to you?
I noticed there was a package lying on the back seat. I didn't pay too much attention, and I said, "What's the package, Lee?" And he said, "Curtain rods." And I said, "Oh yes, you told me you were going to bring some today."
Not only was Oswald carrying a large package, but he'd forgotten to bring a lunch bag.
When he rode with me, I say he always brought lunch, except that one day on November 22nd. He didn't bring his lunch that day. Right when I got in the car, I asked him where was his lunch, and he said he was going to buy his lunch that day.
They arrived in Dallas a few minutes before 8 o'clock. Typically, they would walk together from the parking lot to the book depository. But on this particular Friday, Oswald grabbed his curtain rods and rushed ahead into the building.
Oh my god.
Working on the ground floor, in view of the rear entrance, was their colleague, Jack Doherty.
Did you see Oswald come to work that morning?
Yes, when he first came into the door.
Did he have anything in his hands or arms?
Well, not that I could see of.
Frazier and Doherty are the only two people known to have seen Oswald entering the building. Frazier says he was carrying a package. Doherty says he was not. Contradictions like this one will become a recurring theme throughout the rest of this video. We'll take a closer look at the missing curtain rods in a later chapter, but for now, let's stay with Oswald. As the morning progressed, Oswald was seen working as normal. Roy Truly described him as an above-average worker who mostly kept to himself. In fact, he was a bit of a mystery to his colleagues.
On the way back and forth between Irving and Dallas, did you talk very much to each other?
No, sir, not very much. He was one of these types that just didn't talk.
I was acquainted with Lee Oswald during the time he was employed at the book depository, but I never did get to know him well. He did not mix with the other employees and did not appear to want to make friends with me or any of the others.
Did you ever speak to Oswald?
Yes, sir.
Did he ever speak to you?
No, sir.
He never replied to you.
No, sir.
Would you say he was unfriendly?
Yes, sir, I would.
But there were exceptions to his reticence, and one of them occurred on this Friday morning. James Jarman was working on the ground floor when he observed Oswald staring at the window facing Elm Street.
Oswald was standing up in the window, and I went to the window also, and he asked me, what were people gathering around the corner for? And I told him that the president was supposed to pass in the morning, and he asked me did I know which way he was coming. And I told him, yes, he'll probably come down Main and turn on
seems as though Oswald had no idea that Kennedy would pass by the book depository. This was indeed the case for some of his colleagues. Jarman himself had only been made aware of the fact shortly before he spoke with Oswald. There's no doubt that Oswald knew the president was coming to Dallas, but whether he knew the route of the motorcade is much more difficult to prove. The route of the motorcade had only been finalized a few days before the visit and hinged upon its destination. Kennedy was supposed to attend a banquet in Dallas, but no one could agree on a venue. It came down to two options: the Trade Mart northwest of downtown, or the Women's Building to the east. One of the more vocal proponents of the Trade Mart was Texas Governor John Connally, and after much back and forth, he finally got his way on November the 14th. Had the Women's Building been selected, the motorcade would have sped through Dealey Plaza, east on Main Street, significantly further away and perpendicular to the book depository. Not to mention that First Lady Jacqueline would have been seated between the building and the president. The selection of the Trade Mart meant that the motorcade would now head west on Main Street and make these turns through Dealey Plaza to reach the northbound lanes on the freeway. Now, these turns could still have been avoided had the motorcade continued like so and not taken the freeway, but since the freeway was the more scenic and expedient route, it was the more attractive choice. All of that is to say, the success of the assassination was largely dependent upon the selection of the Trade Mart. It might therefore be tempting to cast suspicion upon Governor Connally, but it should be noted that he rode in the presidential limousine along with the Kennedys and suffered grave injuries during the shooting. Not only that, but Connally was actually opposed to a motorcade and favored a more direct route from the airport to the Trade Mart, a brief trip that would have bypassed Dealey Plaza altogether. He was unfortunately overruled by Kennedy himself, who wanted to see and be seen by the people of Dallas. Okay, so all that was happening behind the scenes, but as far as the public was aware, there wasn't even going to be a motorcade. As late as November the 15th, the Dallas Morning News reported that the motorcade seemed unlikely. But the very next day, the parade was finally confirmed. While the precise route followed by maps and detailed descriptions was not officially disclosed until November the 19th, someone familiar with Dallas could have approximated the route a few days in advance. That is to say, the earliest point a member of the public could have deduced that Kennedy would be driven past the book depository was November the 16th, less than a week before the visit. There's a good chance that Oswald saw these articles because he'd been observed reading political columns in the various newspapers. Furthermore, we know from other aspects of Oswald's life that he was politically inclined.
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes sir, and also other philosophers. But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist. Oh, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist. What is the difference between the two? Well, there's a great deal of difference. That several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These then are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
Conversely, a lack of interest in politics is precisely why at least one of Oswald's colleagues remained oblivious to the motorcade. So while it's understandable for someone apolitical to be taken off guard by a presidential visit, it makes far less sense for someone like Oswald.
On November 21st, the day before the assassination that you were describing, was there any discussion between you and your husband about President Kennedy's trip or proposed trip to Texas, Dallas, and the Fort Worth area?
I asked Lee whether he knew where the president would speak and told him that I would very much like to hear him and to see him. I asked him how this could be done, but he said he didn't know how to do that and didn't enlarge any further on the subject. This was also somewhat unusual, his lack of desire to talk about that subject any further.
How did you think it was unusual? Could you explain that?
The fact that he didn't talk a lot about it, he merely said something as an answer, and did not have any further comments.
Do you mean by that, usually he would discuss a matter of that kind and show considerable interest?
Yes, of course. He would have told me who would be there and where this would take place.
We'll never know what Oswald was thinking when he spoke with James Jarman shortly before the assassination. But it is worth repeating, though, that Oswald was hired on October the 15th. That's a full month before the motorcade route had been decided, let alone announced to the public.
What am I supposed to do in those cases?
On the morning of November the 22nd, a handful of employees have been assigned to install a new plywood floor on the 6th floor of the book depository. Every once in a while, they would catch a glimpse of Oswald.
I saw Lee Oswald shortly before lunchtime. He was by himself with a piece of paper in his hand. I had nothing to say to him, but some of the other male employees teased him and told him he ought to go get a haircut. Lee Oswald just laughed at this remark.
Shortly before noon, it was time for lunch. For a bit of fun, they decided to race the 2 elevators down to ground level. As they began descending, they observed Oswald now standing on the 5th floor. He shouted for them to stop or to close the gate to the elevator upon reaching the 1st floor. Charles Givens then realized he'd forgotten his jacket and cigarettes up on the 6th floor. About to return to ground level, Givens spotted Oswald approaching.
Lee was coming from the window up front where the shots were fired from.
Did you watch where he walked to?
Well, no, sir. I didn't pay much attention. I was getting ready to get on the elevator, and I say, "Boy, are you going downstairs?"
What did he say to you?
I say, "It's near lunchtime," and he said, "No, sir. When you get downstairs, close the gate to the elevator. That meant the elevator on the west side. You can pull both gates down, and it'll come up by itself."
What else did he say?
That is all. I said, "Okay," and got on the elevator.
And with that, Givens became the last person inside the book depository known to have seen Oswald before the assassination. At least, that's the official story. The encounter was fixed at 11:55, more than half an hour before the shooting. But other employees claimed to have seen Oswald in other parts of the building around the same time or even later than Givens. Givens himself provided conflicting accounts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This encounter notwithstanding, Givens was not the last person to visit the 6th floor. Shortly after Givens had left, Bonnie Williams grabbed his lunch and went upstairs. He sat down right about here to await the president's arrival.
Now, when you were sitting by the window, could you see down towards the southeast corner?
No, sir. I couldn't see anything as I remember there. About the only thing that I could see from there would be the top edge of the window because the boxes were stacked up.
Did you see anyone else up there that day?
No, I did not.
The southeast corner is the location from where the shots that killed the president
Oh
were
my
believed to
god.
be fired, the so-called sniper's nest. Williams says he was alone, but admits his view was obstructed by tall stacks of boxes. Meanwhile, down by the main entrance, someone was attempting to gain access to the building.
I met an elderly white man at the entrance of the building who asked me to direct him to a restroom. The man was very old and feeble and could hardly make it up the steps. About 5 minutes later, I saw this man leave the building and enter an old Buick automobile with 3 elderly white women. The Buick then drove away.
Did you see him talk to anyone in the building?
No, he went straight out.
This individual was never identified and is the only unknown person known to have entered the book depository before the shooting. After finishing his lunch up on the 6th floor, Bonnie Williams heard the voices of James Jarman and Harold Norman emanating from the floor below. Feeling a bit lonely, Williams went down to the 5th floor and joined his 2 colleagues. The exact time of Williams' departure is unclear, but it was likely no more than 10 or even 5 minutes before the shooting. On the grounds below, a sea of spectators lined the streets of Elmer, Houston. Every once in a while, one of them would glance up at the book depository. Indeed, Jarman, Williams, and Norman were spotted on multiple occasions, leaning out the far east windows on the 5th floor. But movement could also be seen on the floor above them, a floor that, by all accounts, was now supposed to be empty. Awaiting the motorcade by the east curb of Houston was a young, newlywed couple named Arnold and Barbara Rowland. Some 15 minutes before the shooting, Arnold spotted a white man in the westernmost window on the 6th floor of the book depository. The man was holding a rifle. his gaze locked at Houston. Despite standing a few meters away from an officer, Arnold chose not to report the gunman.
Did it ever enter your mind that you should go and tell the policeman of this sight with this vision that you had seen?
Really, it didn't.
It never entered your mind.
I never dreamed of anything such as that. I mean, I must honestly say, my opinion was based on movies I have seen, on the attempted assassination of Theodore Roosevelt and the other one, Franklin Roosevelt. And both of these had Secret Service men up in windows or on top of the buildings with rifles. And this is how my opinion was based, and why it didn't alarm me. Perhaps if I'd been older and had more experience in life, it might have made a difference. It very well could have. Do you ever have reoccurring dreams, sir?
What?
Do you ever have reoccurring dreams?
Yes.
This is a reoccurring dream of mine, sir. All the time. What if I told someone about it? I knew about it enough in advance, and perhaps it could have been prevented. I mean, this is something which shakes me up at times.
If Roland's recollection is accurate, it stands in direct conflict with that of Bonnie Williams, who claimed to eat lunch on the same floor at the same time. Williams neither saw nor heard anyone, despite having an unobstructed view down to the southwest corner of the building where Roland claimed to
Sam, if you're still here, you're 95% of the reason why I don't want to be joined.
A different spectator named Howard Brennan spotted a white man pacing to and fro the easternmost window on the 6th floor. At 12:30, the presidential limousine emerged from behind the building and began driving north from Houston. As the car made a sharp left turn at Elm, a high school student named Amos Newlands glanced up at the book depository and caught sight of a protruding metal rod. Few realized what had happened. Was it a firecracker, backfiring motorcycle, or presidential salute? People near the Rolands even started laughing, perhaps feeling a bit foolish for being frightened by the ostensibly harmless explosion. Standing by the northwest corner of Elm and Houston was James Worrell. He thought the explosion had come from directly overhead. Sure enough, on one of the upper floors, Worrell could see the barrel of a gun. At that moment, a second explosion echoed through Dealey Plaza. Worrell and Ewens witnessed the recoil and muzzle flash of the rifle in concurrence with the sound. Brennan had yet to realize what was happening. He thought a firecracker had been thrown from the book depository. He looked up and the man he'd seen pacing only minutes before was now aiming down the sights of a rifle. Brennan could only recall hearing 2 shots, but his testimony implies he might have heard 3. He confusingly said he saw the gunman fire the last shot, yet denied seeing the discharge of the rifle. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, the rifle was seen by a handful of witnesses as the gunman cautiously withdrew from the window.
The rifle, or what looked like a rifle, was drawn fairly slowly back into the building, and I saw no one in the window with it. I didn't even see a form in the window.
I could see his hand, you know, the rifle laying across his hand. And I could see his hand sticking out on the trigger part. After he got through, he just pulled it back in the window.
He drew the gun back from the window, as though he was drawing it back to his side, and maybe paused for another second, as though to assure himself that he hit his mark, and then he disappeared.
Neither Ewens nor Worrell saw the face of the gunman and could thus offer little to no information regarding his appearance. Arnold was quite some distance away, yet furnished a basic description of the man he'd seen about a quarter of an hour before the shooting, a description that was quite similar to the one provided by Brennan, who got the best look at the gunman. Taken together, these accounts paint a picture of an assassin on the 6th floor of the book depository, taking aim with a rifle and firing at the president from the sniper's nest. But other accounts leave room for a bit of doubt. As previously mentioned, Arnold Roland spotted a white man with a rifle in the westernmost window on the 6th floor about 12:15. But as late as 5 minutes before the shooting, Arnold observed an elderly black man leaning out the easternmost window on the same floor. He might have confused the 6th floor with the 5th, where James Jarman, Bonnie Williams, and Harold Norman did indeed lean out the windows. In fact, they were the only black employees known to watch the motorcade from a floor above the first. Except they could hardly be described as elderly. But then, take a listen to this.
Will you describe with as much particularity as you can what that man looked like?
It seemed to me an elderly black man. That is about all. I didn't pay very much attention to it.
This question was then repeated to Arnold a few minutes later, at which point his answer had dramatically changed.
He was very thin, an elderly gentleman. Bald or practically bald. Very thin hair if he wasn't bald. Had on a plaid shirt. I think it was red and green. Very bright color. That is why I remember it.
Can you give us an estimate as to age?
50, possibly 55 or 60.
Can you give us an estimate as to height?
5'8", 5'10", in that neighborhood. He was very slender and very thin.
Can you give us a more definite description as to complexion?
Very dark or fairly dark. Not real dark compared to some black men, but fairly dark. It seemed like his face was either, I can't recall detail, but it was either very wrinkled or marked in some way.
So, in the span of a few minutes, Arnold went from "I didn't pay very much attention" to describing the man's complexion, hair, clothing, age,
Yeah,
height,
fuck this
build, and even
fucking
the blemish.
shit level. Oh my god, man. What am I supposed to do when that happens? Like, where am I supposed to go in that situation? I'm just fucked. Oh my god. Like, what am I supposed to do? If I can't drop into the middle or the side I'm on, I'm just dead. Also, I gotta stop doing that on those. Don't do that shit. What am I supposed to do there? I genuinely don't get it. Like, what's the fucking solution? Like, I can see what I'm doing wrong. I should be staying on the same side. I'm too used to having to switch sides whenever shit like that happens. Should have kept on holding right. Actually stayed on the same side for once. Great. Don't flinch, please. What does that do? Okay, I just pressed. Yeah, okay. I thought I had a keybind for some reason. Was that like 67 seconds? I think so. That was another 55% attempt. Yeah, I should have gone to. That's what I hate the most about this level, the fact that there's like no small pause between attacks, they just start right up. Yeah, I don't even know what the fuck I was supposed to do there. Multiple times from the 4 is essentially a death sentence. I don't know what the thought process was there. I couldn't have survived that if I fucking paid for survival. That one was even worse. There was a 0% chance I was ever surviving that one. And it repeats the same attack again. Wow. Yeah, okay. I should have just waited for that cycle to end. I was rushing ahead because I was thinking I may as well get to the next section as soon as possible. Oh my god, my... Okay. Yeah, okay. I wish the I wish some of these patterns were removed. It's like, no matter how consistent I get at like all of these, it's just completely up to luck whether I get a reasonable pattern or not. Like that one should be removed. Wait, I was actually wondering, is there a 3 to 4? I was hoping there's a 3 to 4, a 3/4 widescreen fix. No. I'm gonna pretend that made total sense because of course this level needs a 3/4 widescreen fix. But maybe if it had it, the level would be more reasonable. Kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself. Like, see what I mean with attacks fucking being too close together? Shit's still on the screen from the previous attack. And it makes dodging certain things so much harder. Like, there's some clean transitions in some cases wherein, like, the attacks are fairly long, like this one always has a clean transition, right? It's, like, barely noticeable. But for, like, the cross, there's still, like, 20 years of that shit being on the screen after it should be gone already. And the same thing goes for whenever it transitions into the double edge thing. So I've been getting to like 20 seconds every single time. Can I just get like a bit further, please? Well, now I'm just getting impossible patterns because I said that. Guess I shouldn't have expected anything else from this level. Look at that. Pile of dog shit, man. what am I supposed to do in that scenario? I actually go for the pattern I'm clearly supposed to do, because that's how the fucking thing is set up. And then it fucking throws the wall at me. I cannot believe this shit. Yep, okay. Can I please just get to a minute again so I can fucking fail miserably and feel bad about it so I can stop playing this pile of shit? Yeah, nice. I did nothing wrong.
On his face.
Sometimes some people are prone to exaggerate more than others, and without in any way meaning to take away from the testimony of your husband as to what he saw in the building at the time, just from your general experience, do you feel you can rely on everything that your husband says?
I don't feel that I can rely on everything anybody says.
Well, this is really an unfair question for me to ask any wife about her husband, and I am not asking it very correctly,
At
but
times, my husband is prone to exaggerate. Does that answer it?
I think it does. Is there anything else you want to add to that, or not?
Usually, his exaggerations are not concerned with anything other than himself. They're usually to boost his ego. They usually say that he is really smarter than he is, or he's a better salesman than he is. Something like that.
As leading as that line of questioning was, Barbara was not alone in doubting her husband's credibility. Officials at two separate high schools attended by Arnold explicitly warned authorities not to trust everything he says. He was characterized as someone who would not hesitate to fabricate a story and not tell the truth. Indeed, Roland lied or exaggerated on multiple occasions when he testified.
It happened again. I make it to the actual part that matters and I died.
Was Carolyn Walter. Shortly before the arrival of the motorcade, Walter had seen a man with blonde or light brown hair in one of these windows on the 4th or 5th floor. She explicitly ruled out the 6th. It should be noted, however, that during the shooting, this window was closed with the blinds down, while this one, as you already know, was occupied by Bonnie Williams and Harold Norman. In any case, the light-haired man seen by Walter was holding a machine gun, and standing beside him was another man wearing a brown suit. Much like Arnold Roland, Walter assumed the gunman was a presidential guard and refrained from telling the police. In fact, there's no evidence she told anyone of what she'd seen, not even the colleague with whom she watched the motorcade. In Walter's defense, 2 other witnesses recalled seeing a man with light or light brown hair on the 5th or 6th floor, except they never saw a weapon nor an accomplice. Disagreements regarding the floors were at least in part due to the ground floor lacking visible windows.
How do you know it was the 6th floor? 6th floor rather than the 5th floor?
I went with the FBI and I showed him the window, and I didn't count the bottom floor.
You mean the first time you gave a statement, you didn't count the bottom floor?
That's right.
Another source of confusion was the distinct visual difference between the 7th floor and the ones below.
When you first glance at the building, you're thrown off a little as to the floors because there's a ridge. It almost looks like a structure added onto the top of the building, about 1 story above, so you have to recount.
Not only that, but multiple witnesses described the 6th floor as the 2nd floor from the top. But in the chaos that ensued, it seems the tail end of that sentence was not always recorded. Amos Ewens is another curious witness because even though he never saw the gunman's face, he did see the top of his head. Somehow.
What did you see in the building?
I saw a bald spot on this man's head.
Next time I'm gonna go through when it's 3 left.
I was looking at the bald spot.
Because clearly
He did not have a bald spot.
it's not
He
working.
was thinning a bit in the front, but otherwise had a full head of hair. But the strength of Ewan's account is somewhat diminished by his inability to recall much of anything else.
Could you tell whether he was a black gentleman or a white man?
No, sir.
Couldn't even tell that, but you have described that he had a bald
Spot in his head. Yes, sir. I could see the bald spot in his head.
Now, could you tell what color hair he had?
No, sir.
Could you tell whether his hair was dark or light?
No, sir.
Long after the assassination, 15 years to be precise, a journalist working for the Dallas Morning News tracked down a man named Johnny Powell. Powell had supposedly seen 2 men fiddling with a scope on a rifle in the sniper's nest. He described their complexion as darker than white, but that was about it. Once again, one has to wonder if he confused the gunmen with Jarman, Williams, and Norman on the floor below. I mean, after 15 years of silence, there's no telling how Powell's memory could have been distorted. A good example of such distortion is Richard Carr. A few minutes before the shooting, Carr had been standing roughly here when he spotted a man on the 7th floor of the big depository, all the way over here. The man was white and wore a hat, glasses, and sport coat. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, Carr returned to ground level and caught sight of what he believed to be the same man now trotting south from Houston. He made a left turn right about here before being picked up by a station wagon. By 1969, however, Carr's story had notably changed. The man with a sport coat had now been standing on the 5th floor, not the 7th. After the shooting, Mr. Sportcoat had emerged from behind the book depository, accompanied by 2 other men. They too had been picked up by a separate station wagon before speeding away. It's unclear how Carr is supposed to have seen all of this, considering what he told the FBI back in '64.
Carr advised that from his location on the steel structure of the new courthouse building, it would have been impossible for him to observe the lower floors and entrance of the book depository, and that from his position he could only see the top floor and the roof.
In Carr's defense, James Worrell had seen a man emerge from the rear entrance of the book depository about 3 minutes after the shooting. This man also wore a sport coat and headed south from Houston. Except the man seen by Carr was kind of stocky and wore a hat, while the man seen by Worrell had a slender build and was hatless. Besides, anyone connected with the shooting, leaving via the rear entrance, would surely have headed north, not towards the scene of the crime. As if that was not enough, 2 other witnesses, James Romack and George Rackley, stood roughly here for several minutes after the shooting. Both of them paid special attention to the rear entrance of the building.
Mr. Romack stated that from the time he heard the shots, he had looked toward the book depository and had, under his immediate observation, the loading dock and the back door. He stated he is positive that no one came out of this door or out of the loading dock doors.
Could Could you see the back door of the Texas School Book Depository?
Yes.
Were you looking towards that direction?
Yes, sir.
About how long did you keep your eyes fixed over there?
Oh, I would say 5 minutes anyhow. Probably 10. I was looking up that way at all times.
Did you see any people leave the Texas School Book Depository by way of the rear exit?
No, sir.
Did you see any people running north on Houston Street?
No, sir.
Unfortunately, conflicting accounts were not limited to the book depository. Among the hundreds of witnesses in the vicinity of Dealey Plaza, nothing was as disputed as the number and origin of the gunshots.
Governor Conley was holding his stomach. And the shots were almost simultaneously, weren't they? Yes, sir. They were probably 10 seconds apart. Do you know who fired the third shot? I didn't hear I don't recall a third shot. There may have been. My family hit the ground, and I don't recall a third shot. I just couldn't. I'm not certain of that. I do know I heard 2 shots.
Yeah, I heard 3. I know
You
there
heard
were
3. Well,
Yeah, I said to Jerry after the second shot, I said, my God, those are gunshots.
No one knows exactly how many spectators were in or near Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination. Well over 200 were at some point questioned by a combination of authorities, journalists, and others. Attempts have been made to consolidate the various accounts, and it's clear from all such attempts that the majority of witnesses heard 3 shots. What's a bit less clear is the source of the explosions. The gunman was either placed in the vicinity of the book depository, marked here in red, or an area west of the building, marked in green, known as the grassy knoll. But as you can see from these pie charts, the assessment of earwitness testimony is highly susceptible to bias. It's a surprisingly subjective exercise that can lead to widely different results. Nevertheless, there were a substantial number of witnesses who pointed to the grassy knoll, located roughly here, and many of them were scattered throughout the plaza. To give you some examples, August Campbell was standing near the front entrance of the book depository, yet believed the shots had come from the grassy knoll. Meanwhile, Marilyn Sitzman was standing on the grassy knoll, yet believed the shots had come from the book depository. Standing beside Campbell was a woman named Geraldine Reed, who believed the shots had come from the book depository. Standing by the curb in front of Sitzman was William Newman, who believed the shots had come from the book depository. One might therefore conclude that there must have been 2 assassins, one in the book depository and one in the grassy knoll. Indeed, countless authors and even a congressional investigation have done precisely that. Now, the scope of this video is not nearly exhaustive enough for me to attempt any conclusions regarding the second gunman, but I do want to leave you with this. You might have seen these unlabeled blue slices before. Well, that's how many witnesses heard gunshots coming from multiple directions. That is to say, next to no one did. All the shots came either from the east or west, not both.
Mr. Campbell believed the noise came from away from the book depository. This illusion, he explained, may have been due to the sound bouncing off the building and other objects in the vicinity.
August Campbell was far from alone in being deceived by the pronounced echoes of the gunshots.
Where did the noises or shots sound to you like they came from?
It was hard to tell because they had an echo, you know. There was actually 2 explosions with each one. There was the shot and then the echo from it. So it was hard to tell.